The drill stopped mid-scream. I'd been grinding steel for the past 3 hours, bent over a piece of hand-forged railing for a downtown loft that probably cost more than I made in a year. My back ached. My shirt clung to me like a second skin. The shop's radio buzzed with static between country songs and truck ads. That kind of noise drowns out a lot, but not everything, especially not the silence that comes just before the fall. My phone rang. Just once. Becky. I pulled my gloves off with my teeth, wiped my hand on my jeans, and answered. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't shake. It was flat, so flat it felt rehearsed. "Pack your things," she said. "The apartment's no longer yours." I didn't speak. What was there to say? I heard laughter in the background. A boy's voice, no two. Dan and Trevor. Her sons. My stepsons. The same ones I drove to school when they missed the bus, who used my tools without asking and blamed me when they broke. I had raised them like my own. But boys like that never forget the shape of the man whose blood they carry. Even when he's nothing but a rumor. The line went dead. I stood there for a while, just breathing, just listening to the sound of the shop, the tick of metal cooling on the workbench, the soft whir of the ceiling fan overhead, the grind dust settling in my throat. Something inside me felt dislodged, not broken, just shifted, like a loose gear inside a locked machine. I shut the workshop down without thinking. Lights off, door bolted, keys in the lockbox. I'd done it 1,000 times before. Habit moves faster than grief. The drive home was quiet. No music. No voice to fill the cab. Just the sound of tires swallowing highway. The building hadn't changed. 3 floors, brown brick, rust stains bleeding down from the gutters like old scars. I parked where I always did, spot 13, half covered in oil stains and pine needles. The front door opened when I turned the knob. Not locked. No chain. Inside it was cold. Sterile. Not in temperature, in feeling. Like the air itself had been scraped clean of me. The table was the first thing I saw. Not mine anymore, but it used to be. I built it myself, quarter-sawn oak, jointed clean, sealed to last longer than I would. She used to say it made the apartment feel like a home. Now it was just a staging area. The divorce papers were laid out in perfect alignment, pen resting beside them, like I was supposed to appreciate the presentation. Becky had already signed her side. Her name was smooth and confident, looped in blue ink like a signature on a birthday card. I didn't see her. She didn't wait. But Dan did. He was rocking in one of the chairs, back legs ticking on the floor like a slow, steady pendulum. The kind of ticking you hear in a dream before something collapses. Trevor stood by the window, hands in his hoodie pockets, staring out like he was waiting for a getaway car. The light from the street cast his shadow long across the floor. Dan smirked. "We've been waiting." Trevor didn't turn around. "You were never meant to be here." They'd practiced that, rehearsed it like a play. 2 actors in a scene they thought they owned. I walked to the table. My boots were the only sound in the room. I picked up the pen. I didn't ask questions. I didn't raise my voice. What would be the point? Some wars end before the fighting starts. This one had ended years ago, the day I became useful instead of wanted. The day my role changed from father figure to financial instrument. I signed. It was quick, like ending a contract, not a marriage. "Good luck," I said. I didn't say it for them. I didn't say it with warmth. It wasn't a blessing. It was a receipt. And then I left. The door clicked shut behind me. I waited for a moment in the hallway, just listening. No voices followed me. No one called my name. They didn't slam the door. They didn't rush to stop me. They wanted me gone. And they wanted it to look clean. Outside, the sky had gone that pale, bruised gray it gets just before the rain. I walked past the place where the boys used to leave their bikes rusting in the grass. Past the crack in the sidewalk Becky always meant to fix. Past the window I once climbed through because Dan locked himself in and cried that he was scared of being alone. He was 6 then. He's 17 now. Still scared. Just louder about it. I got into my truck and sat for a while. The seat was still warm from when I'd left the shop. My gloves sat in the passenger seat. My thermos was half full. There were still metal shavings in the folds of my pants. And for the first time in months, maybe years, there was silence. Not just around me, in me. Something that used to ache had stopped. Not because it healed, but because it died. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I didn't think about where I would sleep or what I would do. I just sat there, in that silence, breathing like I hadn't in weeks. You build a life for people. You give them your strength, your time, your hands. You give until the giving becomes your identity. And when they finally tell you to leave, when they sweep your presence off the table like a spilled drink, you realize how little you ever owned. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. That night, all I felt was tired and free. Took me an hour to find a diner. Just off the highway. One of those places with burnt coffee, too many laminated menus, and a waitress who doesn't ask questions. I took a booth by the window, ordered a black coffee and nothing else. Sat with my hands wrapped around the mug like it was the last warm thing left in my life. I wasn't looking for comfort. I just didn't want to sleep. The phone buzzed sometime after 11. At first I thought it was Becky. Some last-minute attempt to justify what she'd done. Some line about needing space. Or maybe Dan trying to twist the knife. But no, it was worse than that. Nick Hodges. I hadn't seen that name in 5 years. Didn't even know I still had the number saved. It lit up the screen like a ghost crawling out of the past. Nick had worked with Becky. Briefly. Back when she was running admin at a private contractor's office. The kind of place where invoices went missing and numbers never quite added up. Nick got fired after 3 months. Embezzlement. Nothing too flashy. Just enough skimming to keep himself in beer and unpaid rent. Slippery kind of man. Always smiling, always broke. Last I heard, he'd skipped town. Now here he was resurfaced. The timing was no coincidence. I didn't answer. Just stared at the name until it disappeared. The waitress came back. Refilled my coffee. I thanked her without looking up. Then I opened a browser on my phone. Traced the number. It was registered to a company I'd seen before. Indigo Harbor Solutions. Generic name. No website. But I remembered it. I flagged that company 2 years ago when it showed up on our joint credit report. Becky said it was a mistake. That she'd applied for a refinance and the name just auto-populated. I believed her. Of course I did. We were married. Trust comes with a wedding band, doesn't it? I pulled up the old report. Found the entry. Indigo Harbor had submitted a soft inquiry under her name. Then a few months later it vanished. And now the number that lit up on my screen was tied to the same name. That's when the trail started to glow. Becky's sudden money. The weekends she said she was visiting her sister and came back with new clothes, new bags, new stories that didn't quite land. The private yoga classes, the spa retreats, the new phone she gave Dan after his grades miraculously improved. And of course, the sudden push for divorce, complete with papers already drawn up and served like a warm meal. She didn't just want me gone. She needed me gone. I sipped my coffee. It had gone cold. Didn't matter. I opened our joint banking portal. Still had access. She hadn't cut me off yet. Probably assumed I wouldn't look. Probably figured I'd be too broken, too stunned, too respectful to pry. She was wrong. The charges weren't even hidden. She didn't bother to mask them. Multiple withdrawals to Indigo Harbor, listed under consulting. Thousands pulled over the last 6 months. All while telling me we needed to tighten the budget. All while I worked weekends, pulled double shifts, sold half my tools to pay for Trevor's driving lessons. It all lined up. Nick's return. Becky's withdrawals. The boys' sudden swagger. They thought they'd removed a piece from the board. Cleared the path. They didn't just discard me. They replaced me. I sat back in the booth, staring out the window. Rain had started to fall slow, steady, like the sky wasn't in a rush to cleanse anything. The diner lights buzzed overhead, humming in sync with my pulse. My marriage hadn't ended in a fight. It ended in paperwork, in planning, in silence thick enough to smother a man. Nick was back in the picture, which meant one thing: she was either funding him or laundering through him. Either way, it wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud. And she was sloppy. I took out my pad, started writing. Dates, transactions, connections. The whole thing started to unfold like rot beneath wallpaper. I remembered the look on Trevor's face when he said, "You were never meant to be here." He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was victorious, like someone who'd waited long enough to see the plan come together. Dan had always been louder, but Trevor, he was precise. They had watched her orchestrate it, and they'd helped. It had taken time. Years, maybe. A long campaign of cold shoulders and rolled eyes, of undermined rules and private conversations behind doors I paid to keep standing. But they had done it. Worn me down. Made me the ghost in my own home. The stranger they tolerated until he was no longer needed. I remembered the apartment when I walked in earlier. How quiet it was. Not the kind of silence that comes after a fight. It was prepared. Set. Staged like a crime scene, waiting for the body to arrive. They didn't think I'd fight back. They thought I'd drive off, vanish. Like some disposable laborer who'd finished the job and knew better than to linger. And I might have if they'd just left me broken. But they made a mistake. They let me see the blueprint. The pieces were already moving. All I had to do was push. The waitress passed again. I asked for another refill, voice calm. She smiled, tired. Said she liked my handwriting, neat, deliberate. Said I looked like a man who kept records. She had no idea. I thanked her, then pulled out my laptop. Years working in construction finance had taught me how to follow money. How to sniff out cooked invoices, bad paper, disappearing funds. Becky used to joke I was paranoid. I used to laugh. Said I couldn't help it. That numbers were the only honest thing left in the world. She should have listened more closely. I logged into a tool I used to monitor shell companies. Traced Indigo Harbor Solutions deeper. It was connected to 3 other names, all out of state. All flagged for unusual lending behavior. One of them had been blacklisted by a local credit union. And Becky had wired money to all 3. I leaned back again. Let it all settle. This wasn't about a failed marriage. This was a purge. And Nick was the cleaner. The man who shows up when someone needs to offload guilt in exchange for gain. He always did have a knack for sniffing out desperation in women with more secrets than sense. I closed the laptop, drank the rest of my coffee. The rain kept falling. A bus passed the diner, its windows smeared with streaks of city grime. Somewhere inside, people slept. Others stared into the dark, hoping the ride would take them somewhere better. I didn't envy them. At least I knew exactly where I was going. I made the call at 3:17 a.m. Not to Becky. Not to Nick. I called someone who still owed me a favor, Ryan Banks, former fraud investigator turned private compliance consultant. We worked a job together 3 years back. A crooked contractor was moving money through subcontractor shells, draining public project funds under everyone's nose. Ryan cracked it open in under a week. We never talked much after that. But when I called, he answered. "You still up?" I asked. He laughed once. "When am I not?" I gave him the names, the routing numbers, the paper trail I'd pieced together from our shared finances. Told him where the wires landed, which banks, which accounts. He listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a pause, the sound of typing on his end. Then a long breath. "You want this handled quietly?" "No," I said. "I want it handled properly. You realize how messy this could get?" She left me divorce papers on the table like an invoice. Her sons were laughing in the background. "They want me erased? Let's see how clean they keep their hands." He didn't argue. He just said, "Send everything you've got. Now." By 3:45 a.m. The package was out, encrypted files, screenshots, financial statements, authorization trails. Every detail backed by documentation. I'd been a bookkeeper long before I was a builder. Paper doesn't lie. It just waits to be read. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't want to. I sat in the parking lot of a closed gas station, headlights off, watching the sky shift from black to slate blue. There's a stillness that settles in the hour before sunrise, like the world's holding its breath, waiting. They didn't know what was coming, but I did. At 6:12 a.m. My phone lit up with an email notification. Then another. Then another. 3 total, stamped and confirmed. Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. Austin District Attorney's Office. Internal Compliance Unit at First Union Bank. All 3 had received the reports. All 3 had opened them. And all 3 had already assigned case references. I didn't smile. This wasn't vengeance. It wasn't rage. It was just consequence. By 7 a.m. I had parked across the street from the apartment. The one Becky said wasn't mine anymore. I kept my distance. Same truck. Same worn jacket. I blended in with the contractors filling the neighborhood. Becky's car was still there. So were Dan's and Trevor's. They hadn't left for school yet. Probably assumed it was just another Monday. Probably still asleep. At 7:42 a.m. the first car arrived. Silver Lexus. Legal plates. Man in a dark suit stepped out, briefcase, lanyard, badge. He buzzed the building. Waited. 10 seconds later, a second car pulled in. Compact sedan. 2 men inside. One in a windbreaker. One in a tie. Both had clipboards. Both had that look. The one people get when they walk into a house knowing it's about to stop pretending. Then a third. Unmarked. Black. Government tags. 3 men stepped out. No smiles. No hesitation. This wasn't an inquiry. This was a raid. I watched from my truck. They didn't knock politely. By 7:50 a.m. all 6 were inside. They didn't come out for a long time. At 8:14 I saw Dan through the window. Shirtless. Confused. Holding a phone like it was a lifeline that had just snapped. He disappeared behind a curtain. At 8:19, Becky stepped onto the balcony. She was in a robe. Her face was blank. Not scared, not yet. Just trying to calculate the cost of something she thought was still manageable. She lit a cigarette. Her hands shook. The man in the windbreaker joined her. Started talking. Pointed at the paper he held. She didn't take it. Just stared past him like the conversation wasn't happening. The moment reminded me of when she used to fight bills. When she'd let envelopes pile up until the red letters showed through, and then she'd hand them to me like I was the engine that powered her delay. I watched her nod. Once. Twice. The man stepped back inside. At 8:32, the front door opened. Trevor came out first. Hoodie pulled up. Hands stuffed in his pockets like that could hide the panic. Dan followed, now fully dressed. He looked pale. He looked 15 again, not 17. Not triumphant. Becky stepped out behind them. She didn't look at the street. She didn't look at my truck. But I think she knew. Because her face, that carefully practiced coldness, cracked. Not a lot. Just enough to show she wasn't in control anymore. They stood on the curb, boxed in by quiet authority. No shouting. No handcuffs. But the air was heavy. A man from the bank arrived. Clean suit. Carrying 2 folders. He spoke to Becky. She didn't argue. Just nodded again. I saw the paper when she finally took it. Account closures, likely. Notifications of seizure. The fine print she never read when she was cashing checks. Dan was pacing now. Trevor just kept staring at the ground. They didn't look like boys who had won anything. At 8:41, Becky turned. She scanned the street. Her eyes stopped at my truck. I didn't move. Didn't wave. Didn't smirk. I just stared back. She didn't blink. She didn't cry. But she knew. She knew. And that was enough. At 8:47, they went back inside. Agents started to leave. One handed something to Becky. A card, probably. If you have questions. That kind of thing. The black car left last. By 9:05, the street was quiet again. No sirens. No cuffs. Just a house with the truth spilled all over its floor. I waited. At 9:16, Dan stepped out again. He spotted my truck. Walked straight over. No hoodie this time. Just rage wearing a teenage face. He knocked once. Firm. I rolled the window down. You ruined everything, he said. His voice cracked on the second word. I shrugged. I wasn't here by accident. But you picked the wrong door. He stared at me for a long time, waiting for me to blink, to apologize. I didn't. He turned. Walked back toward the apartment. Didn't slam the door. Didn't look back. And this time, I was the one smiling first. After Dan walked off, I stayed in the truck for another hour. Not because I was waiting for anything. I just didn't feel like moving. The day was warming. Sunlight creeping down the brick walls. That brittle Texas glare that dries your eyes before you know you've been crying. I wasn't, though. That had come and gone years ago. The last time I believed any of this had the shape of a real family. I watched the neighborhood come alive. Delivery trucks humming. A woman dragging her garbage bins across cracked pavement. A jogger with earbuds in, oblivious. All of them passing by the building like it wasn't sinking under the weight of its own rot. Becky didn't come out again. I wondered what she was doing inside. Calling Nick? Trying to shift the blame? Scrambling to freeze what money hadn't already been swallowed? Or maybe she was just sitting there, staring at the table where I used to leave her morning coffee, where I left my name beside hers on a sheet of legal paper she'd already signed in ink that never bled. I started the truck. Pulled out slow. No rush. No music. Just the road under my tires and the kind of quiet that means something's over. Not suddenly, not violently, just finished. I didn't go home, because I didn't have one anymore. The place I paid for wasn't mine. The woman I married had weaponized silence into a strategy. The boys I fed and taught and bailed out of trouble were already rehearsing my erasure before I even knew the stage was set. I drove aimlessly for an hour, then two. Ended up in the parking lot of a hardware store I used to frequent for weekend projects. Back when I thought making the apartment better would make us better. Funny thing about tools. They don't betray you. They break, sure, but they never lie. I sat in the truck, thinking about everything I'd built in that apartment. The custom shelves I carved in the closet so Becky could finally organize her overflow of shoes. The drawer dividers in the kitchen. The sealed backsplash behind the stove. The one she loved because it reminded her of the Airbnb in Sedona. All of it made by my hands. My hours. My belief that effort was the same as love. And now, someone else would live there. Or maybe they'd lose it altogether when the bank finished its sweep. I thought about Trevor. His hoodie. His blank face. The way he didn't even flinch when they handed his mother those papers. I used to pick him up from school when he was 12. He liked to sit in the front seat and ask questions about how engines worked. He told me once he wanted to build cars when he grew up. That boy disappeared somewhere between middle school and now, replaced by a shape with the same face, colder, sharper, quieter. I blamed hormones. Then I blamed the divorce. Then I blamed myself. Now I know better. He learned early how to survive in silence, and how to punish the man who made noise. That evening, I checked into a motel on the edge of town. Paid in cash. Left the blinds half shut. The bed was stiff, the AC was loud, and the shower tiles were cracked like dried earth. But the door locked, and no one spoke to me. That night, I lay on the mattress staring at the ceiling. Felt the weight of what I hadn't said. Because the truth is, I had known for a long time. Maybe not the details. Maybe not the plan. But the distance. Started small. Missed texts. Short answers. Becky saying she was just tired when I tried to touch her at night. Dan choosing weekends at his friend's place over dinners I grilled for hours. Trevor forgetting my birthday. You ignore it at first. Tell yourself it's normal. Teenagers are moody. Marriage ebbs and flows. Life gets busy. Then it starts calcifying. Becky stopped asking about my work. Stopped asking anything, really. Her conversations turned into transaction updates. Groceries, schedules, bills. Her voice changed when she spoke to Nick on the phone once, thinking I couldn't hear her from the garage. And the boys? They sharpened. Dan got bolder. Started correcting me in front of guests. Trevor got quieter. Used silence like a blade. They didn't scream, "You're not my real dad." That would have been too easy. No, they said it in glances. In skipped acknowledgments. In the way they handed Becky receipts instead of me. I remember one Christmas, 2 years ago. I built Dan a custom case for his guitar. Lined it with crushed velvet. Engraved his initials on the brass plate. He looked at it. Said, "Thanks." like I'd handed him a napkin. His biological dad, Paul, sent him a last-minute package. A used pedal from eBay, wrapped in newspaper, arrived late. Dan opened it, lit up like he'd been handed the key to another world. That's when I knew. Blood isn't thicker than water, but it stains deeper. Back in the motel, I sat up, turned on the lamp, pulled out a pen. I wrote a letter, not to Becky, not to the boys, to myself. I wrote down everything I'd given. Money, time, labor, apologies, pauses, sacrifices. Then I made a second column, what I'd received. Not gifts, not dinners, not the occasional thanks, but real things, human things, respect, loyalty, presence. That column stayed empty, and that was the answer. The next morning I checked out, went to a cafe near the river, sat outside, ordered nothing but water, watched the sun rise over the slow current. And then I did the thing no one expected. I called Becky. She picked up on the third ring. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't slept, like maybe the walls of her carefully constructed story were already groaning. She said, "What do you want?" I paused, then said, "I want you to listen." She didn't speak, so I continued. "You don't owe me anything. Not anymore. You made your choice. The boys did too. I'm not coming back. I'm not fixing anything. I'm not paying off the mess." A breath. Then I added, "But I want you to remember something. You didn't just end a marriage. You ended an era. You ended the life of a man who spent every hour trying to build something for you. And when it stopped being useful, you let your sons sweep me out like trash." She said nothing, but I could hear her breathing. Slow, shallow. "I hope it was worth it," I said. "Whatever Nick promised. Whatever story you told yourself. I hope the version of life you imagined without me tastes as good as you thought it would." Still no answer, but silence was better than lies. Before I hung up, I said one last thing. "Next time you tell someone they weren't supposed to be there, make sure they're not the one holding the map." Click. The call ended, and with it everything else.